Stop fighting to be understood. A Zen story right now. A prickly, hot, and restless vibration is radiating steadily across the outer skin of your arms, winding around your elbows and pulling tightly up the side of your neck. It is the distinct, stinging ache of being deeply misunderstood. The agonizing awareness that people have taken your intentions, twisted your words, and constructed a completely false version of your character in their minds. You are caught in a furious, exhausting internal loop, drafting imaginary defenses and replaying the unfair accusations, desperately trying to correct a narrative that was never yours to begin with. Your skin carries the heat of this invisible friction, holding on to a deep, burning fatigue from fighting a shadow war against critics who have already closed their ears to who you actually are. The immediate space of your room is changing as the late night hours settle into a quiet, slaty-gray stillness outside. A dry, rhythmic rustle moves through the grass, a steady mountain wind sweeping across the roof and brushing the exterior timber walls with a hushing sound. The sharp, clean scent of crushed juniper needles and dry soil rises from the earth outside, carrying a grounded quality that remains entirely indifferent to the opinions of the valley. The cool breeze entering the room gently pulls the residual heat away from your bare arms, while the dark, unmoving silhouette of the low bookshelf stands like a solid anchor at the edge of the floorboards. With every slow, unhurried release of your breath, the prickly heat along your neck begins to recede a fraction of an inch, letting the desperate attempt to change their minds run out of momentum. You are not broken. What you are feeling in this restless armor across your shoulders is not failure, nor is it a sign that your integrity has been diminished because a distorted mirror down in the valley reflects a twisted image of your heart. The profound frustration of being slandered or misrepresented that you carry tonight is actually the hidden entry point toward an unshakable form of inner peace. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become a silent, empty void by command, and we will not pretend that the sting of injustice is easy to carry. Instead, we are going to learn how to change the way your spirit relates to a world that refuses to see you clearly. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend, and you do not need to fix your reputation before you are permitted to let your shoulder blades sink. Right now, in this single pocket of time, nothing is required of your self-defense. There is a surprising insight hidden within the old lineages of wisdom that directly meets your current state of exhaustion. The mind does not find liberation because it has finally succeeded in forcing everyone else to agree on its goodness. True peace begins when you realize that the intense anxiety you are using to draft your defense tonight is actually an illusion of control, a desperate, subconscious attempt to manage the thoughts inside another person's head by making your own body suffer. We often believe that if we can just find the perfect combination of words, or if we keep ourselves raw and hypervigilant, we will somehow rewrite the false stories and protect our name from distortion. But this is the great trap of the misunderstood spirit. Trying to polish your public image in a storm of gossip is like a cluster of split bamboo poles hanging in a chaotic crosswind. When the wind blows, the pieces clatter together furiously, generating a loud, discordant noise they did not choose. The mind suffers because it tries to fight the wind, becoming entangled in its own defense, rather than recognizing that it is simply hollow timber that can choose to remain completely still within its own center. Take a slow breath in, letting the cool air move down through your throat and fill the deep, tight corners of your lower chest. As you let that breath slide back out into the quiet room, imagine that the hot, prickly vibration along your arms is turning completely loose, letting the harsh judgments of others slip out through your fingertips like dry leaves blowing across a flagstone. Maybe you have felt this too, the sudden, sharp panic that if you stop defending yourself, if you let your mind rest before the truth is recognized, you are somehow admitting defeat or letting the false narrative win. It is an ancient, exhausting pattern that lives in the deepest tissues of the body, telling you that your vigilance is the only shield protecting your identity from erasure. But Buddhist wisdom points us toward a much more spacious understanding of our nature. The version of you that lives in the minds of your critics is merely a shadow, a temporary cloud passing through an empty valley. It has no structural power over your living breath, unless you choose to invite it into your marrow. In a moment, our path will lead us toward a remote mountain orchard filled with bitter wild persimmons, where a young scribe sat beside an old wooden clapper, feeling the exact same burning defensiveness that is dampening your spirit right now. But before we journey into that quiet grove, allow yourself to notice where your body is gripping its armor. Let the muscles along the side of your neck soften. Let your arms rest heavily against the fabric beneath you, without any internal readiness to strike, and let your lower jaw drop a tiny fraction so your teeth are no longer grinding against the injustice of the day. You are safe enough to soften right now. The universe will continue its silent turning without your explanations for the next few hours, and every twisted rumor, every cold silence, and every unfair accusation can remain exactly where it is, suspended in the dark. What if the internal silence you have been burning your energy to secure through argument is not something you must buy with your current exhaustion, but a natural state that returns the moment you stop trying to control the reflection in a broken mirror? We spend our nights treating our thoughts as an endless petition, rereading the evidence of our innocence to an audience that has already decided not to look, hoping to hear a word of understanding that can only come from our own willingness to yield. We turn our reputations into monuments, and then we wonder why our skin feels so throbbed and hot when the light goes out. The suffering we experience does not come from the simple fact that people are mistaken about our character. It grows from the internal resistance that refuses to let the wind blow through our hollow center without making a sound. Let another breath arrive on its own time, without you needing to measure its velocity or dictate its depth. Let it fill the spaces across your chest and let it go. You are nothing more than a living form resting in a dark room, completely hidden from the timeline of those who judge you. In the deep silence that is growing between us, the mountain gale outside is passing straight through the empty spaces of the trees, asking for no verification and demanding no defense before it moves across the ridge. Let your awareness settle into the simple, cool sensation of the breeze against your skin, as we prepare to step onto the dry grass of the old orchard, where the keeper is waiting to show us how to let the clatter stop. High on the windswept terraces of the northern pass, where the soil was thin and grew only stunted, bitter trees, lay an isolated orchard of wild persimmons. It was a silent, gray place bounded by weathered stone walls and low-hanging clouds that smelled continuously of crushed, bitter leaves and damp granite. In this remote outpost lived Soto, a young novice scribe who had fled the prosperous market towns of the valley below in a state of burning humiliation. Soto moved through the terraced rows with a stiff, guarded stride, his chin tucked down into his collar, his arms perpetually folded tightly against his chest, as if he were trying to contain a hot fire that threatened to split his ribcage. For 3 weeks, a prickly, restless rash of defensive anger had covered the outer skin of his arms, kept alive by the agonizing knowledge that his character had been publicly defaced. Down in the valley, Soto had been commissioned to register the grain deeds for the district magistrates. When an entire season's storage ledger was found to be altered, a wealthy merchant had loudly accused Soto of accepting bribes, parading a forged scroll through the crowded square. While the townspeople muttered in agreement, Soto had tried to shout over the noise, offering his clean record and his raw, ink-stained fingers as proof of his honesty. But the crowd had already turned its face away, preferring the colorful scandal to the quiet reality of his innocence. He had walked away into the mountains with their sharp, mocking whispers ringing in his ears, his mind converting every falling leaf into an echo of their judgment. He spent his evenings sitting on a wooden bench in the orchard cabin, frantically grinding charcoal ink to draft long, intricate letters of self-defense that he had no way to send, trying to force a collection of people 3 leagues away to see the true shape of his heart. The keeper of this high orchard was Master Bankay, an elder whose skin was the texture of dry hemp rope, and who moved through the fierce crosswinds of the pass without ever adjusting the folds of his coarse wool habit. Bankay rarely spoke of philosophy, spending his hours tracking the hidden rot in the tree roots or observing the flight of mountain crows through the fog. He knew the exact rhythm of Soto's torment, hearing how the boy's brush scratched violently against the coarse paper at midnight, his breath catching in his throat every time the wind rattled the wooden shutters. On an evening when a dry, persistent gale was sweeping up from the canyons, turning the underside of the persimmon leaves a pale, silvery gray, Banke called Soto out to the edge of the highest terrace. From the projecting eave of a low timber shed hung a simple wooden rain clapper, two flat, split boards of seasoned ash wood suspended by a rough hemp cord, designed to clatter together whenever a storm approached to warn the workers on the slopes. Tonight, as the crosswinds tore through the gap, the split boards were thrashing in a frantic, chaotic dance, generating a loud, discordant clicking that filled the small clearing with an unpredictable rattling noise. Soto stood beside the elder, the hot prickling along his skin flaring up as the dry wind whipped his hair across his neck. He looked at the thrashing pieces of wood, his jaw locking in a familiar, defensive knot as he assumed the master was about to lecture him about his lack of meditative composure. Master Banke did not offer a hand to steady the clapper. He simply reached out with his weathered fingers, grabbed a dry, bitter persimmon leaf from a nearby branch, and held it out in the palm of his hand, letting the wind roll the crisp fiber over his skin. He asked the young scribe, in a voice that was low and flat like the sound of a distant drum, where the loud, irritating clatter in the clearing was actually being created. Soto gestured impatiently toward the swinging timber, his voice tight with an unspent, defensive heat as he replied that the noise was coming from the split boards themselves. He said the wood was forcing the clearing to be loud, shaking violently in the wind and refusing to remain still, filling his ears with a constant agitation that made it impossible to find a single moment of quiet. He confessed that his own life felt exactly like that rattling clapper shaken by the opinions of the valley, forced to vibrate in a language of scandal he did not choose, clattering furiously in the dark to defend its right to be silent. The old orchard keeper let the dry leaf fly away into the fog. He told the scribe that the timber was completely hollow, seasoned by years of frost, and carried no inherent noise within its grain. Banke pointed out that the split boards did not create the gale, and they did not hold an internal desire to strike one another. They were simply hanging in a space where an erratic current was passing through. The clatter did not belong to the wood, and the wood did not try to argue with the wind. The agony Soto carried did not come from the false scrolls or the merchant's loud accusations down in the valley. It grew entirely from his own internal resistance, his exhausting attempt to grab the swinging clapper with his bare hands to force it to be quiet. While the storm was still howling through the mountains, Soto stood perfectly still in the gray fog, his eyes fixed on the hollow space between the two thrashing boards. For the first time since he had fled the town square, the frantic heat along his forearms began to recede, allowing a long, slow exhalation to slide through his parted lips. He looked out over the deep purple chasm that separated his mountain from the valley below, realizing that the false version of him living in the merchant's ledger was nothing more than an erratic wind moving through another person's mind. His own identity was not inside that wind, and his character was not broken by the noise it generated. Slowly, the deep stillness of that high orchard terrace moves closer to the immediate coordinates of your own dark bedroom tonight, letting the image of that split wooden clapper mirror the exact condition of your own misunderstood heart. You have been lying awake trying to grab the swinging timbers of everyone else's opinions, burning your vitality to draft defenses against a gale that is passing through a valley you have already left behind. You have believed that if you just hold your breath tightly enough, or if you refuse to rest until the record is set straight, you will somehow protect your true self from distortion. But the wind has its own changing nature, and your suffering cannot alter its path by a single fraction. Let the clapper rattle in the dark, allowing your awareness to settle into the hollow, unmoving center of this present hour, where the timber asks for no defense before it meets the night. This account of the hollow wood thrashing in the pass is not instructing us to seal our hearts away from the world, nor is it asking us to cultivate a cold, unfeeling numbness that remains indifferent to the pain of an injustice or the sting of a twisted rumor. It is not an invitation to build a thick, defensive wall of apathy where we no longer care about our integrity or the clarity of our interactions with those around us. Instead, it is pointing toward an internal position that is much quieter, a gentle shift in perspective that allows us to witness a distortion without turning that distortion into a fire that consumes our current vitality. The persistent prickling that vibrates across the outer skin of your arms tonight does not survive simply because a false accusation was spoken down in the valley. The deepest suffering takes root when the mind insists on holding that external story as an active structural part of your own living identity. When we view this Latinite restlessness through the clear, simple lens of Buddhist insight, we see that what we often call attachment is actually that tight, defensive knot in the neck that insists, until I can compel every single person to see me perfectly, my entire being is in a state of terminal jeopardy. It is the unfortunate habit of locking our fundamental safety into the unpredictable reflections inside another person's head. We treat our reputation as if it were a solid clay vase that must be continuously shielded from the wind. And when an erratic gust knocks it over, we believe our actual center has been broken. This is the modern reality of craving. It is the frantic, exhausted driving that keeps us checking our notifications or drafting imaginary letters of self-defense at midnight, hoping that one more perfect sentence will somehow force a closed mind to open up and grant us our freedom. But a closed mind down in the valley cannot yield up your peace, no matter how many times you replay the evidence of your innocence to the dark ceiling. The false rumor has already left their lips. The distorted version of your character has already been scribbled into their ledger. The crosswind has already entered the clearing. When we lie awake burning our energy to fight these unchangeable currents, we are actively participating in an internal process that adds a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply the raw, unavoidable friction of navigating a world populated by flawed perspectives, the unfair judgment from a supervisor, the cold dismissal from a friend who chose to believe a rumor, the casual misrepresentation of your motives during a tense meeting. These moments are genuinely painful, but they belong to the natural, erratic weather of human interaction. The second wound, however, is the one we strike against our own skin when our thoughts turn inward and declare, because they choose to view you this way, you are fundamentally ruined, unsafe, and unworthy of rest. Let this quiet realization sit directly next to the hot, prickling armor along your shoulders right now. Consider what happens when we replace that desperate desire for public validation with simple, spacious awareness. This quality of mind is not an academic exercise or a complex discipline that you must execute flawlessly before your eyes can close. It is simply the capacity to look directly at the noise of your critics, without allowing that noise to dictate the value of your breath. It is the ability to observe the restless vibration in your forearms, to label it gently as the old habit of self-defense, and to recognize that the clatter belongs entirely to the wind, not to the hollow timber of your core. When you allow the wind to pass through without trying to grab the swinging boards, you stop feeding the friction that keeps your spirit raw. You let the noise exist in the valley while you remain whole on the terrace. Impermanence, when translated into the immediate texture of your evening rest, becomes an immense sanctuary for a misunderstood heart. It acts as a gentle reminder that the version of you currently being discussed or misjudged down in the market square is not a solid, unchanging reality trapped inside your chest. That false character is nothing more than a temporary collection of smoke and mirrors, moving through someone else's mind, a phantom built out of their own blindness, envy, or confusion. It has no physical substance, no structural weight, and no ability to touch the living form resting against your linen tonight. The body lying in this room is entirely separate from that shadow, its heart beating to a clean, ancient rhythm that has never been touched by the merchant's forged scroll. You do not have to force your current lungs to pant in exhaustion, just to defend a ghost that lives only in the thoughts of a stranger. True letting go does not mean you abandon your values, or that you become indifferent to the truth of your biography. It means you stop using your reputation as a metric to determine whether you are permitted to take a full, unhurried breath in the dark. It means you acknowledge the discordant clatter of the windclapper, Look at the thrashing boards with a soft, non-judgmental eye, and then allow the air to move across the ridge without demanding that the wind apologize before you are allowed to sleep. When you drop the expectation that the world must always reflect your innocence back to you, you discover that true compassion is the willingness to stand in your own empty center and hold your vulnerable heart with a tenderness that requires no external verification. In a moment, this path will lead us into a soft, internal practice where we can begin to experience this spaciousness within our own skin, using the rhythm of our own presence. But right now, notice how effortlessly your body is managing its own survival in the charcoal shadows, completely unconcerned with the opinions of those who judge you. Your pulse does not check the status of your reputation before it agrees to warm your limbs, and your lungs do not demand a public apology from the valley before they open to receive the cool night breeze. You are already being sustained by a deep, natural intelligence that operates entirely outside the boundaries of human approval, resting securely within a night that requires no validation before it offers you its peace. If it feels right, let your attention gather very gently right along the outer curvature of your arms and across the skin of your neck where that hot, restless vibration has been anchoring itself. There is no need to actively push away the lingering discomfort of the day, and there is no requirement to make your thoughts completely silent by force. Simply notice the physical boundary where your skin meets the cool, unmoving air of the room, observing the subtle sensation of heat, as if you were merely looking at a dry piece of weathered timber hanging in a distant gap, without any urgency to alter the current passing through the clearing. As you rest here in the deep, slate-degree stillness of the late night hour, perhaps you can invite a slow wave of softening to move down through the deep muscles of your shoulders. Let the small, rigid fibers along the sides of your neck loosen their protective grip, and let your elbows feel heavy, as if they were sinking naturally into the soft, uncarved space beneath your body. There is no pressure to achieve a sudden state of profound emotional release in this moment. And even just recognizing that your skin still feels prickly, guarded, or hot is entirely enough. You are simply taking stock of your own internal landscape, acknowledging where the mind has been buckle-strapping its armor against the opinions of the valley. Right now, let the specific memory of that public misunderstanding float up into your awareness, perhaps the distorted story you wish you could correct, the cold look of disapproval from someone who misjudged your heart, or the general, heavy worry that you will never be permitted to stand in the light without a shadow. Do not try to analyze the injustice of the narrative, and do not try to fix the perspective of those who choose to misunderstand you. Instead, just name the emotional pattern that is currently tightening across your forearms. You might say to yourself, very quietly, this is the habit of trying to grab the swinging clapper, or this is the old defensive heat trying to rewrite the wind. Just by naming it, you are stepping out of the dark, urgent court case and standing beside Master Bankai in the high orchard, looking at the movement from a place of unhurried safety. Imagine that your inner life is like that simple wooden rain clapper hanging from the eave of the timber shed, its split boards seasoned by frost and entirely hollow within their grain. Look at its pale, weathered timber in your mind's eye. See how many times you have reached out your bare hands today to grab those swinging pieces of wood, hoping that if you could just hold them rigid enough, the loud, discordant clatter would finally stop. In this quiet space, if it feels comfortable, imagine taking that heavy, burning need for justification, that persistent wish to force the valley to see your innocence, and allowing it to rest quietly inside the hollow, empty center between the two ash boards. You do not have to quiet the crosswind with your exhaustion, and you do not have to apologize for the noise. You are simply letting the timber hang in the gap while you step back into your own breathing body. Watch what happens to the internal space across your chest as you let the worry sit outside of your identity. Perhaps the image of the split wooden boards begins to change its texture under the steady, cool sweep of the mountain breeze. The dry, persistent gale is passing straight through the hollow gap between the pieces, moving across the ridge without leaving a single scratch on the grain. The timber does not fight the current. and it does not retain a memory of the loud clicking it generated an hour ago. It simply remains open, unattached to the sound, and entirely whole, its fundamental nature untouched by the storm that is currently blowing through the pass. If your thoughts begin to drift back toward the forged scrolls, the unreturned glances, or the sentences you wish you could speak to clear your name, you can return to the simple rhythmic expansion of your lower lungs whenever you are ready. There is no failure in a mind that wanders back to its wounds. The mountain gale does not apologize for moving through the wild persimmon trees, and your memories are no different from that changing weather. They are simply events occurring within your vast, unmeasured hall of awareness, and they cannot permanently diminish your true self unless you choose to believe that you are the clatter in the clearing. Nothing needs to be forced tonight, dear friend. You are not required to empty your heart of its defensiveness through an act of sheer will, and you do not have to guarantee that your spirit will feel entirely light before the morning light arrives. You are simply a living form, letting the heavy, unalterable opinions of the valley rest on the grass outside your window, while the unmoving dark continues to cradle your shoulders, leaving your inner center wide, hollow, and deeply at peace. Further down the eastern slope, where the rock-strewn canyon split into narrow, shadowed channels that captured the freezing runoff from the summits, sat a hidden terraced garden. In this wind-funneled cleft, the air rushed constantly through the gap, making the dry mountain grasses hiss against the coarse stone walls. In this loud, restless environment lived Chico, a temple cook whose fingers were permanently scarred from the high heat of the iron cauldrons. Chico moved through the kitchen gardens with a frantic, rigid intensity, his jaw perpetually locked, his outer arms carrying a restless, prickly heat that flared up whenever the wind rattled the storage sheds. For 2 seasons, a bitter, defensive fire had been burning behind his ribs, fueled by a severe public accusation of selfishness that had completely cut his connection to the community. During the summer drought, when the lower granaries had run dangerously low, a rumor had spread from the monastery gates that Chico was secretly hoarding bags of white rice in the canyon cellars for his own family. The rumor was a complete fabrication, born from an apprentice's misinterpretation of the salt pots stored below. But the elder monks had publicly reassigned the kitchen keys without asking for his account, leaving him to work in the outer gardens under a cloud of silent suspicion. Chico had spent his evenings walking the perimeter walls, his mind constructing intricate, furious speeches of self-defense, desperately wishing he could force the community to see the clean truth of his dedication. He felt utterly exposed by the false narrative, treating every quiet glance from a passing brother as an intentional accusation that his devotion was a lie. The supervisor of this canyon terrace was Sister Nyoko, an elderly, deaf nun who had spent 40 winters tending the mountain vegetables without ever checking the horizon for approval. Nyoko navigated the fierce crosswinds by watching the vibrations of the dry gourds hanging from the fences, her focus entirely anchored to the immediate work of the soil. She could read the exact velocity of Chico's inner torment by the way he slammed the wooden crates against the slate pathways, his body constantly leaning forward as if he were trying to outrun the invisible whispers passing through the canyon. On a night when a fierce spring windstorm was howling through the gap, rattling the heavy timber beams of the kitchen garden, Nyoko called Chico out to the irrigation channels. Running down the center of the terraces was a complex network of hollow bamboo pipes, split and bound together with hemp cord, designed to carry the cold mountain stream water across the rock beds. Tonight, as the powerful crosswinds blasted through the open ends of the bamboo network, the pipes were generating a loud, discordant screech, a high-pitched, rattling vibration that filled the entire canyon with a harsh, chaotic noise. Chico stood beside the deaf nun, the hot prickling along his arms turning intense as the wind whipped the grit against his skin. He looked at the screaming bamboo pipes, his fingers clenching into tight, defensive knots, his thoughts immediately racing back to the monastery gates, wondering if this constant noise was another sign that his life was doomed to remain chaotic and unverified. Sister Nyoko did not cover her ears against the storm, and she did not try to dismantle the split pipes to make them quiet. Instead, she reached out with her weathered hand, took a small wooden wedge from her apron and placed it gently beneath the binding cord of the main bamboo channel, altering the angle of the pipe's opening by a single finger's breadth. She did not stop the gale, and she did not change the wood, she simply shifted how the pipe met the current. Instantly, the harsh, discordant screech softened into a low, completely neutral whistle, the wind passing through the hollow interior without creating friction against the inner walls. She then placed Chico's hand directly over the smooth, vibrating bark of the bamboo stalk and looked into his eyes. The old nun did not offer words of comfort, and she did not promise that the monks down in the valley would return his keys. Instead, she stood perfectly still in the windstorm, her sightless attention turned toward the hollow tube, showing him that the timber did not hold a grievance against the air that passed through it. She pointed out, through her quiet, unmoving stance, that Chico's true suffering did not come from the false rumors or the loss of the kitchen keys, for those were merely changing winds moving through another part of the mountain. The agony came from his own exhausting habit of treating every critical thought as if it were a solid truth written into the wood of his core. Chico stood in the howling gale, his palm resting against the smooth, open bamboo pipe. For the first time since the summer drought, he did not turn his mind inward to draft his defense, and he did not strike the crates in frustration. He chose a much smaller, deeper transformation, one small act of internal discipline. He simply sat down on the cold river gravel in the dark, took one long, unhurried breath before his thoughts could react, and allowed the uncertainty of his reputation to exist in the very same room as his lungs. He stopped the habit of treating the whispers as an absolute verdict on his worth, letting the false stories remain down in the valley, while his own center stayed perfectly empty and still. This was the subtle transformation, not a sudden, magical clearance of his name, and not a state of perfect, unbothered enlightenment. It was the simple decision to stop fighting the wind with his bare skin. As he sat there on the gravel path, the hot, prickly armor along his forearms began to cool down, letting his awareness expand past the narrow boundaries of his defense. He realized that the bamboo was whole, precisely because it was hollow, and that his own character remained completely untouched by the noise, like the wind passing straight through the empty wood without leaving a single mark. When we cast our attention backward over the landscapes of our own lives, we begin to decode the hidden emotional engine that converts an unfair misrepresentation into an ongoing sentence of internal friction. We often assume that our late-night exhaustion is a direct consequence of the physical words spoken by our critics, or the unfairness of the situations we navigate. But if you observe the quiet, prickly heat currently radiating across the skin of your arms, you will find that the real consumer of your vitality is the continuous hidden act of resistance. It is the energetic strain of refusing to let the wind pass through the canyon without trying to arrest its movement. The desperate attempt to manipulate an uncontrollable external reality through the application of your own suffering. We treat our minds as an active laboratory of defense, continuously whipping our current muscles with the memory of an unfair accusation, operating under the tragic delusion that if we keep our skin raw and alert, we will somehow rewrite the history of what they think. This is the exact point where we can begin to separate the original weight of existence from the elaborate psychological armor the mind builds on top of it. Buddhist wisdom approaches this dilemma with a beautiful, direct distinction between the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is simply the raw, unpolished impact of being alive in a world constructed out of unpredictable currents. It is the sudden drop in the village's trust. It is the false ledger paraded through the market square. It is the cold look of suspicion from someone who chose a colorful rumor over the quiet reality of your integrity. These occurrences are genuinely painful, yes, but they belong to the basic, unpreventable weather of human fallibility. We cannot control the arrival of the first pain, for the crosswind does not ask the permission of the bamboo grove before it blasts through the canyon. The true torment begins when our thoughts take that first pain and knead it into a permanent moral identity, actively constructing the second pain out of our own resistance. The second pain is the elaborate mental trial we host right along our neck, where we translate a temporary external story into a definitive commentary on our absolute safety. We do not simply notice that someone has misjudged our intentions. The mind turns inward and whispers, because they choose to view you this way. You are fundamentally unsafe, ruined, and unprotected from the dark. We do not just navigate an unfair rumor, our thoughts declare. This distortion is proof that your core is inherently flawed. This is the mechanism of turning pain into identity. The unfortunate habit of mistaking a temporary screech in the irrigation pipe for the actual substance of the hollow wood beneath it. When we exist within this pattern of self-judgment, our awareness spends its late night hours rehearsing the future and replaying the past, frantically attempting to build a wall of hypervigilance against the terrifying landscape of social uncertainty. We stay awake repeating the details of the injustice, because we believe that our burning defensiveness is a form of protection, that if we keep the argument alive and raw, we will somehow prevent our name from being erased. We develop an insatiable need for external approval, using the validation of others as a temporary bandage to cool the internal prosecutor we carry in our skin. But trying to heal your misunderstood spirit through the accumulation of public praise is like trying to silence a windclapper by covering the timber. With dry leaves, the wind remains trapped in the clearing, waiting to rattle the wood the moment the sun goes down. True self-forgiveness does not manifest because you have finally forced every blind eye down in the valley to see your innocence perfectly. It begins with the radical, quiet realization that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is an entirely different relationship with the difficulty itself. It is the willingness to stand in the howling gale without immediately picking up the timber pieces to hit your own chest. When you allow the reality of the rumor to exist without transforming it into an absolute verdict on your soul, you are stopping the second pain before it can plant its roots in your body. You are choosing to sit on the river gravel in the dark, letting the wind be wind, and letting the bamboo be bamboo, without needing to apologize to the universe for the shape of your reflection in a broken mirror. As you let the mattress support the heavy framework of your shoulders right now, notice how the desperate urge to change their minds begins to lose its grip when it is met with simple, non-judgmental awareness. You do not have to settle the record of your entire biography before the night ends, and you do not need to guarantee that your actions will be understood by tomorrow morning. The path toward inner freedom does not ask you to become a magically perfect creature who never experiences the sting of slander. It simply requires the very small, very steady discipline of noticing the critical loop along your arms, naming it as the old defensive fire, and refusing to give its declarations the authority of truth. You are the vast, open canyon that holds both the rock and the gale. You are not the harsh screech that is currently softening in the dark. In a moment, this gentle insight will move even closer to the small, ordinary triggers of your modern life, showing us how to carry this soft hand into the waking world without guilt. But for now, let your attention sink down into the quiet, unmoving center of your lower lungs. Let your ribcage expand outward on its own natural rhythm, taking up all the space it requires in the slate-gray shadows, completely free from the narrow ledger sheets of human approval. You are safe enough to drop the protective armor right here, leaving your spirit as unblemished, wide, and hollow as the deep bamboo before the first current ever rushed through its center. Now let this quiet understanding step softly across the centuries, moving out of the rock-strewn canyon gardens and directly into the small, electric friction of your ordinary evening. The split wooden clapper and the hollow bamboo pipes we have been exploring are not abstract puzzles meant to live only inside an ancient text. They are the exact configurations of energy you hold along your arms when you lie awake at midnight, staring at the faint blue glow of a screen, waiting for a text message that might validate an explanation you sent hours ago. We live so much of our modern lives inside this digital hypervigilance, checking our devices for an external sign of absolution, replaying a perceived social slight or an accidental misrepresentation, as if the repetition could somehow alter the thoughts of those who have already closed their minds. We pretend to be completely okay during the daylight hours, smiling while feeling an immense heavy thickness inside our chest, carrying the constant worry that we are fundamentally not enough compared to the smooth, seamless paths we see others displaying on our feeds. You can begin to transform this exhausting mechanism right in the middle of the very moments that cause your neck to tighten, recognizing that peace is not an Alornithing victory, but a quality practiced in the smallest, most unexceptional slivers of the day. When you find yourself caught in the frantic urge to check your phone for reassurance, or when you are lying awake replaying a rumor or a workplace misunderstanding, you are fully permitted to pause, a single slow breath taken before you type a defensive response or review your past arguments is a profound form of wisdom. It is a quiet, somatic realization that not every self-critical thought deserves your immediate obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command that must be followed into an internal court case. You are simply stepping out into the open terrace of your own presence, letting the dark charcoal lines of the mind pass over your head like summer rain, without allowing them to mar the permanent slate of your core. Perhaps you have spent years operating under the unconscious law that your right to rest must be bought with a continuous display of immaculate performance, and that wanting to let your eyes close while a misunderstanding remains unresolved is a form of guilt-ridden failure. We treat our rest as an identity that must be earned through absolute flawlessness, fearing that if we stop adjusting the pipes or analyzing our stumbles, we will be cast out into the dark. But the hollow bamboo pipe does not feel a shred of remorse for sitting empty under the drizzle, and the wet slate slab does not apologize to the open garden for letting the ink dissolve into the sand below. You can rest without earning it first. Your exhaustion is not a moral debt that must be settled through hours of overthinking. It is simply the natural voice of an internal instrument that has run out of momentum from trying to collect the spilled water of an unchangeable past. It is entirely possible to care deeply about the people you love, your professional obligations, and the preservation of your connections without gripping their outcomes so fiercely that you crush your own fingers on the shards. When we attempt to control the future or rewrite the past through the continuous application of our own shame, we are acting like Chico before his crates were dropped, refusing to let the reality of the wind be exactly what it is. True inner freedom begins when you allow your living biography to be offered to the world with a loose, receptive hand. You can apologize for a misstep, offer your sincere amends, or complete your daily chores with the simple, unforced presence of a stone slab in the rain, letting the expression leave your fingers without demanding that it return to you with a guarantee of absolute safety. The next time the creeping throb of regret settles behind the bridge of your nose, when you find yourself comparing your hidden, messy struggles to the manufactured timelines of those around you, look down at the quiet weight of your own body and take a slow breath. The accidental tear in the fabric or the clumsy phrase spoken in tension is merely the external weather of an unpredictable existence. You do not have to pretend the hurt did not happen, and you do not have to force an immediate state of complete healing before the raw edge has even cooled. It is completely enough to sit with the uncertainty of your own imperfect life, letting the irregular fragments of your day rest on the flagstones without needing to stamp them with the label of permanent unworthiness. In a few moments, the remaining definitions and scorecards of the daylight hours will dissolve entirely into the dark, leaving nothing but the vast, protective space of this midnight room. As your limbs prepare to surrender their final defensive structures, release the illusion that you must fix the trajectory of every fallen vial before you are permitted to let your shoulders sink. The accounts of the day carry no authority in this quiet sanctuary, and the unresolved stains can remain suspended in the cool rain outside your window. Let your attention drop back down into the steady, unhurried rise and fall of your lower lungs, knowing that the pristine slate of your true nature is already fully intact, completely clean, and entirely at peace. The dark hour has fully arrived now, and the quiet gravity of the night is settling over your bed like the thick, unmoving fog that holds the canyon garden in absolute stillness. Every single effort you made today, every argument you replayed behind your eyes, and every anxious reach for reassurance has dropped its momentum, dissolving into the silence of this slaty gray room. The heavy, unalterable stories of the valley are no longer pulling at your neck. They have slid away, falling through the floorboards into the quiet earth, leaving your internal space completely empty, spacious and cool. Your shoulders and your forearms are sinking a fraction of an inch deeper into the support beneath you, as if the hollow timber of your inner nature were finally remembering its relationship with the steady, unmoving foundation of the mountain. Let your breathing become very small, very quiet, and entirely effortless. There is absolutely no need to regulate the air as it moves down through your throat. The lungs know how to expand and soften on their own time, like the slow, steady movement of the mountain breeze, passing directly through the empty channels of the bamboo irrigation pipes. With every long, unhurried release of breath, the tight, defensive clenching that you held across your outer skin is letting go of its grip. The discordant lines of your critics are no longer being tracked or verified by an internal court case. The wooden crates have been dropped onto the gravel pathways, the inkstands are resting in the dark, and the terraced walls have completely vanished beneath a blanket of silent, protective dark. You have permission to stop solving your life for tonight. The swinging wooden clappers, the split bamboo channels, and the strategies for tomorrow do not require your presence while the canyon is cold. They can remain suspended in the shadows outside your window, completely separate from the living form that is resting here in the quiet. You are under no obligation to repair your entire biography before your eyes are allowed to close. You are permitted to be unwritten, unmeasured, and completely finished with the trial, resting within the safe sanctuary of an uncompromised night that asks for no explanations before it offers you its blanket of rest. The teaching of the wide, windswept pass is settling deep into the marrow of your bones now, filling the heavy spaces across your shoulders with an enveloping tenderness. You are returning home to the pristine silence that was always waiting beneath your desire to change the minds of others, the vast, unmeasured awareness that cannot be stained, because it belongs to the open valley of your own presence. Let the universe carry its own silent turning for the next few hours, while your spirit drifts further away from the language of human metrics and transactional approval. Your jaw is loose, your arms are heavy like dry persimmon leaves resting in the shade, and the cool, still rhythm of the evening is cradling your weary body as you prepare to slide away into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. What if the wind could pass completely through the hollow wood of your soul without finding a single surface to hit? The open sky that spans the northern peaks does not keep an index of the clouds that crossed it at midday, nor does the empty mountain chasm demand that the wind offer an apology before it is permitted to settle into the quiet of the night. All the restless friction that accumulated along your skin during the waking hours, the exhausting attempt to correct a false narrative, and the continuous internal drafting of explanations to those who choose not to see you clearly, all of it is losing its structural force under the steady, anchoring weight of this dark hour. The mind can finally let go of its heavy armor because there is no permanent monument left to defend and no external reflection left to polish. You are simply here, a living form resting securely within the unmoving shadows, entirely separate from the stories written about you by voices you have already left behind in the valley. When we look directly into the spacious hall of the heart, we find that our true nature is not like a fragile sheet of paper that can be permanently defaced by a drop of spilled ink or a critical remark. It is much more like the hollow space inside the split bamboo pipe that allows the fiercest canyon gale to roar through its center without leaving a single mark upon the grain. The misunderstandings that felt so hot and burning this afternoon were never your core identity. They were merely erratic currents of air, passing through a landscape you happen to inhabit. You do not need to wrestle the wind with your bare skin, and you do not need to prove the purity of your intent to a storm that has no ears. You only need to remain upright, wide, and entirely empty, letting the noise move across the mountain ridge until it runs completely out of momentum. Think of how much vitality has been burned away in the effort to maintain a flawless reflection in a collection of broken mirrors, to force closed minds to open up and grant you the validation you have always carried within your own breath. That constant strain, that perpetual readiness to strike back against an unfair judgment, is the very thing that has left your neck and shoulders feeling so heavy at the end of the day. But tonight, the market towns are dark, and the ledgers have been closed in the valley. The false stories are not a contamination of your soul. They are simply temporary weather, moving through another person's thoughts, completely powerless to touch the clean reality of your present flesh. You do not need to heal the blindness of others before you are allowed to rest, and you do not need to clear your name before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. Let your attention sink down even further now, moving past the soft expansion of your ribs and settling into the absolute immobility of your lower abdomen. Feel the profound grounding weight of your body as it yields entirely to the mattress, completely supported by the silent intelligence of the earth beneath you. The mountain slopes have held the weight of the old orchards and the heavy granite boulders through thousands of winters without needing a single word of public approval, and they are fully capable of holding your weary limbs tonight. You do not have to hold yourself up anymore. Every unreturned glance, every professional anxiety, and every cold silence can remain suspended in the grass outside your window, losing its shape in the cooling night air. The respiration of your body is becoming so thin, so quiet, and so effortless that it feels like nothing more than a faint whisper of air moving through an empty bamboo grove after the storm has passed. There is no longer any separation between the immense silence of the canyon and the stillness that is expanding within your own skin. The thoughts that were clattering so furiously a few hours ago have turned into pale, translucent shadows, dissolving into the deep, unmeasured pool of your awareness without leaving a single ripple behind. You are returning to the ancient, untroubled home that existed long before the first human standard was ever constructed, the silent, uncarved space where you are already complete, already safe, and already deeply at peace. Let the final definitions of the day slip away entirely now, leaving your spirit as wide, hollow, and unbothered as the dark timber shed resting under the winter stars. There are no records to correct, no verdicts to reach, and no versions of your character to defend in this beautiful, protective dark. The universe will manage its own turning without your assistance, and the morning will bring its own light when the time is right. But right now, in this single pocket of pure presence, nothing is required of you but the simple willingness to drop the tools of self-defense and rest. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The unmoving shadows of the room continue to deepen, absorbing the last traces of the day's friction just as the porous river gravel in the canyon drinks the cold mountain rain without keeping a record of its weight. We carry a profound, unexamined exhaustion when we treat our inner lives as a dynamic fortress that must be continuously guarded against the erratic movements of public opinion, operating under the assumption that if we just stand alert enough, we can dictate what lives inside another person's mind. But the high terraced garden does not demand an accounting from the wind before it allows the soil to rest, and the old persimmon trees do not require the valley's approval before they drop their dry leaves into the dark earth. You are fully permitted to step out of the endless cycle of verification tonight, letting the unresolved arguments stay exactly where they were generated, completely finished with the exhausting habit of defending a reflection that was never your true self. When we look into the quiet, open space right behind your chest, we find that the true source of your latenite tension is not the fact that you were misunderstood, but the tight, defensive resistance that refuses to let that misunderstanding exist as a temporary element of the world's weather. Buddhist wisdom points us toward a much more liberating truth. The reputation you are burning your energy to protect is nothing more than a gathering of smoke, a collection of shifting narratives held by people who are themselves drifting through their own clouds of confusion. The first pain is simply the raw reality of a complicated world, the false ledger, the cold glance, the word spoken in ignorance that distorts your true intent. We cannot always stop the wind from blowing through the pass, but we strike the second blow against our own skin when we take that external noise, bring it into our beds, and declare that our fundamental safety is broken until the valley changes its mind. Let the small, tight fibers along the side of your neck and across your shoulder blades turn completely open now, like a hollow bamboo pipe, letting a sudden gust of wind pass straight through its center, without generating a single discordant screech. You do not have to find the perfect phrase to clear your name before your eyes are allowed to close, and you do not have to settle the record of your entire career before the light goes out. True peace is not a state where everyone suddenly agrees on your goodness. It is the radical interior choice to stop treating the opinions of others as absolute truths that have the power to define your soul. The version of you that lives in the minds of your critics has no physical substance, no structural weight, and no ability to touch the clean, ancient reality of the breath that is currently keeping your body alive. Your limbs are becoming beautifully heavy now, every joint and muscle surrendering its final defensive structures to the deep, unhurried pull of the dark space beneath you. The heavy iron tools of your daily struggle have been dropped into the high grass. The long, difficult effort of trying to outperform the whispers is over, and the quiet room asks absolutely nothing of your hands. Every twisted narrative, every professional anxiety, and every cold silence can remain exactly where it is, suspended in the gray fog outside your window, completely separate from the living form that is resting here in the sanctuary of the night. You are safe enough to drop the armor right here, letting your respiration become so thin, so soft, and so quiet that it feels like nothing more than a gentle ripple moving through a still mountain pool that has completely run out of wind. The artificial boundaries between the wide, windswept pass and the stillness inside your own flesh are fading away entirely into the charcoal shadows, leaving nothing but a vast receptive presence cradled by the deep night. The thoughts that were clattering so furiously a few hours ago are losing their sharp definitions, melting away like evening smoke dissolving over the distant ridges until the stone face of your awareness is completely gray, blank, and untroubled by memory. You are home in the silent sanctuary of your own being, a clean and receptive vessel resting on the solid earth, entirely released from the requirement to produce a melody or justify your existence through a display of perfect symmetry. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The wind that carries the evening chill down the steep stone terraces does not ask the trees to give a reason for their bending, and the deep, silent roots do not demand that the sky account for every passing cloud before they absorb the groundwater. All the electric heavy weight that accumulated along the surface of your skin today, the exhausting attempt to correct a false impression, and the continuous internal drafting of responses to those who choose to hold a narrow view, all of it is losing its hold under the steady, anchoring mass of this late hour. The mind can finally step down from its post at the gates, because there is no permanent structure left to defend, and no external shadow left to chase. You are simply here, a living presence resting securely within the unmoving dark, entirely separate from the stories written about you by voices that belong to the past. When we look directly into the open, windless cavern of the heart, we find that our true nature is not a fragile thing that can be broken by a hard phrase or a public misunderstanding. It is much more like the hollow space inside a dry bamboo stalk that allows a fierce canyon storm to rush through its center without leaving a single mark or scratch upon the inner bark. The distortions that felt so burning and immediate this afternoon were never your core reality. They were merely changing currents of air passing through a valley you happen to inhabit. You do not need to wrestle the wind with your bare arms, and you do not need to prove the purity of your intent to a storm that cannot hear you. You only need to remain upright, hollow, and entirely empty, letting the noise move across the high ridge until it runs completely out of momentum. Think of how much energy has been spent in the effort to maintain a perfect reflection in a collection of broken mirrors, to force closed minds to open up and grant you the peace you have always carried within your own regular respiration. That constant holding, that perpetual readiness to push back against an unfair judgment, is the very thing that has left your neck and shoulders feeling so heavy at the end of the day. But tonight, the valley towns are dark, and the ledgers have been closed. The false stories are not a stain on your soul. They are simply temporary weather, moving through another person's thoughts, completely powerless to touch the clean reality of your flesh. You do not need to heal the blindness of others before you are allowed to rest, and you do not need to clear your name before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. Let your attention sink down even further now, moving past the soft expansion of your ribs and settling into the absolute immobility of your lower abdomen. Feel the profound, grounding weight of your body as it yields entirely to the bedding, completely supported by the silent presence of the earth beneath you. The mountain slopes have held the weight of the old orchards and the heavy granite stones through thousands of winters, without needing a single word of external approval, and they are fully capable of holding your weary limbs tonight. You do not have to hold yourself up anymore. Every unreturned message, every career anxiety, and every cold silence can remain suspended in the grass outside your window, losing its sharp shape in the cooling night air. The breathing of your body is becoming so thin, so quiet, and so effortless that it feels like nothing more than a faint whisper of air, moving through an empty bamboo grove after the gale has passed. There is no longer any separation between the immense silence of the mountain pass and the stillness that is expanding within your own skin. The thoughts that were clattering so interiorly a few hours ago have turned into pale, translucent shadows, dissolving into the deep, unmeasured pool of your awareness without leaving a single ripple behind. You are returning to the ancient, untroubled home that existed long before the first human metric was ever constructed, the silent, uncarved space where you are already complete, already safe, and already deeply at peace. Let the final definitions of the day slip away entirely now, leaving your spirit as wide, hollow, and unbothered as the dark timber shed resting under the winter stars. There are no records to correct, no verdicts to reach, and no versions of your character to defend in this beautiful, protective dark. The universe will manage its own turning without your assistance, and the morning will bring its own light when the time is right. But right now, in this single pocket of pure presence, nothing is required of you but the simple willingness to drop the tools of self-defense and rest. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.